Well, hello, and welcome to Minnesota Homeownership Center's Welcome Home podcast. My name is Bill Gray, and today we're going to take a look at Minnesota's new first-generation down payment assistance programs that came online earlier this year. I have two guests joining me for this conversation today. Heidi Welch is a business relations team supervisor at Minnesota Housing, our state's housing finance agency. Welcome, Heidi.
Thank you so much.
And I have Brooke Walker, my esteemed colleague, Strategic Initiatives Director for the Homeownership Center. Welcome back, Brooke.
Thanks, Bill.
Okay, so let me tee things up here. In 2023, the Minnesota legislature passed into law two new mortgage down payment assistance programs. The first generation Homebuyer loan program was funded with $50 million and is being administered through Minnesota Housing. And the first generation Homebuyers Community Down Payment Assistance Fund was funded with $100 million and is being administered by Midwest Minnesota Community Development Corporation. The center is heavily involved in promoting this second program, and I should state very clearly at the top here, these two programs are not competing with each other. Rather, they're designed to complement each other based on the individual needs of the first generation buyer. So we'll learn about the specifics of each program in a minute, but I want to start our conversation by digging into the why a bit here. Brooke, let's start with you. Why the focus on first generation buyers?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Good question. I think just to give a little context, as you know, the Minnesota Homeownership Center has been heavily focused on ways in which we can help close the racial homeownership gap.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the tools that we found was kind of being underutilized and could be one of the ways that we could help close that gap. And one of the barriers that a lot of communities face is access to down payment assistance. And the state has done a great job at making down payment assistance available. However, we don't tend to reach the communities that need it the most. So we thought that we would attempt to try this first gen program. Some of the small cities had already started doing it. There was some discussion nationally about it. And we thought it might be a better way to reach those communities and be a better proxy than first-time buyer. And first-generation buyer is really about getting at the idea that their parents have never owned a home. And as you know, a lot of times when people move into home ownership for the first time, they often rely on the wealth that has been created by their parents and grandparents.
By owning homes.
Yeah, by building equity and owning homes.
Right.
So if you haven't come from a family where home ownership has been a part of your history, the barrier seems to be a bit more significant.
That makes sense.
So we thought that this would be a good approach and that we could learn a lot from this opportunity. So we decided that we would use targeting of first generation homebuyer.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned the gap. We've talked about this before on the show. Minnesota has one of the largest racial homeownership gaps in the country. I think it's 25% versus 75% about. And it makes sense for all of us to try to figure that out and reduce that. Okay, all right, that makes a lot of sense. Let's get into specifics. Heidi, how does the first generation homebuyer loan program work?
Well, I would be happy to answer that question, but before we start, I'm just going to do a little disclaimer for my attorneys at the agency. Got to keep the attorneys happy.
Yeah.
So in connection with single family division loan programs, Minnesota Housing does not make or arrange loans. It is neither an originator nor creditor and is not affiliated with any lender. The terms of any mortgage finance transactions conducted in connection with these programs, including important information such as loan fees, the APR, repayment conditions, disclosures, and any other materials which are required to be provided to the consumer, are the responsibility of the lender. Thank you for bearing with me. I know that's a long one, but our attorneys really like us to read that.
No problem.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how it works with the Minnesota Housing First Generation Homebuyer Loan Program. We have up to $35,000 available in assistance. We do require that the property is owner occupied, so meaning they have to live in the property. This is not for investment properties. We do have a forgiveness factor built into the way the program is structured. And so as long as the borrower lives in the property for 10 years, then 50% of the original amount would be forgiven. And then if they continue to live in the property for 20 years, then the remaining balance of that original loan amount. So if it was $35,000 that they took out originally, that entire $35,000 would be forgiven at year 20, assuming that they are still living in the property as their primary residence.
Okay.
This program is, we require that all of the borrowers for our program are first-time home buyers. And then at least one of the borrowers in the transaction does need to be first generation. And so as Brooke mentioned, we have the same definition of a first generation buyer. So neither the borrower nor their parents or legal guardians have owned a home before, ever. Our program is available across the entire state, and it can also be layered with our existing down payment assistance and closing cost loans.
Through Minnesota Housing.
Through Minnesota Housing. So we have, Minnesota Housing has a first-time home buyer first mortgage loan. And then there's the possibility of, if you're eligible for the first generation home buyer loan, so up to $35,000. And then we also have 3 additional down payment assistance and closing cost loan options that we've had for years, but those can also possibly be layered with the first gen for potential up to $53,000 in total assistance amount. So it's really a great way to have a huge impact on the transaction.
Yeah.
And you if are interested, you would contact a participating lender. We have over 100 lending organizations, so banks, mortgage companies, et cetera, across the entire state who participate with our programs. And then, you would just reach out to one of the lenders in the lending network. And then we also, and I think we'll probably chat about this in a bit too, but just briefly, home buyer education and home ownership counseling is super important to both programs as well. So that's also an option.
Right. Where can people get more information about about your program?
Yeah. So our website is the best place to start. That's where you can find a lender in our lending network and find more information about the program. And that is www.mnhousing.gov. So MN for Minnesota, housing, and then .gov, so short for government.
Yep, .gov, that's important.
Yep.
Okay. Well, very cool. That sounds like a great opportunity for to help the folks who are working hard every day trying to pay rent, all these other things, and down payment is the hurdle basically. And of course it is, of the prices. Housing prices going up all the time, interest rates are high, inventory probably still a little low, so this is a great opportunity to help people get on that first rung of the ladder and start getting to the point where they can participate in wealth building like the homeowners that are out there right now. Well, that's great. Brooke, let's talk about how the First Generation Homebuyers Down Payment Assistance Fund works. I'm sure it's similar, but I'm sure there's also lots of little differences.
Yeah, it is similar, Bill. And it's a great point that you make about the down payment assistance hurdle, because I think when you hear the amount of down payment assistance that's available, you might, be shocking to some. But in today's current market with a higher interest rate, higher housing costs, and to your point, limited inventory, it is getting more and more difficult to get into homeownership if you don't have the ability to make a sizable down payment. And so the programs have a lot of similarities. I think one of the key differences is the amount of dollars and the repayment or forgiveness factor. So the community fund program is 10% of purchase price up to $32,000.
Okay.
And we structured it that way because we again kind of wanted to make sure that we were providing enough down payment assistance to really help people get into the home, and 10% of purchase price seemed like a good metrics. So 10% of purchase price up to 32,000. So if you are buying a house that's, maybe 280, you're not going to get the full 32,000.
Mhm.
And then the other way that we structured our program is it is forgivable over 5 years.
Mm.
So rather than half forgiven at 10 and the remaining half forgiven at 20, it's forgiven 20% a year over 5 years. And some of this was just about not just creating access, but also helping people build equity a bit quicker
Mm.
in terms of trying to reach people again who have not had the opportunity and access to this generational wealth.
Mhm.
And so, in terms of the definition for first gen, it's the same. We too want buyers to complete homebuyer education. The process in terms of how you access the funds are a little bit different. So with this program, you can use any lender as opposed to with the loan program, you have to work with the Minnesota housing lender, which makes a lot of sense. This program allows the buyer to work with any lender. But there's a couple additional requirements. So it's really important that they start by completing homebuyer education and talking to a lender first, and then applying for this down payment assistance before they even begin shopping. That's a little bit different from how a lot of down payment assistance works. Often you actually have to make an offer on a home before you can apply for down payment. But we thought that there's some barriers with that. And so we're using this program not to just, test a theory around reaching first gen and if that'll help reach more buyers who have been left out of homeownership, but also the idea of trying to make it a little bit easier. And so that when buyers are shopping, they've actually been approved for the down payment. So when they're making an offer, they can say, here's my first mortgage approval, and actually here's my down payment approval. And these funds are being held while I
All
shop
up
for a
front.
home.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So we're seeing we're going to learn and we're going to see
Yeah.
how that works. I think those are probably though the two main differences. So
Okay.
our amount is a little less and our forgiveness period is a little shorter. You can choose any lender you like, but you need to get approved for the down payment before you start shopping.
Before you start shopping.
Yeah.
Heidi mentioned layering for their program. Is this program, is it possible to layer others with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So if a buyer is approved for other down payment programs, they definitely can be layered. The one exception is these two programs cannot be used together.
Yeah.
And essentially, they came from the same source.
Mm-hmm.
They came from the state, and we want to make sure we're reaching as many buyers as possible. So these programs cannot be used together, but both programs allow the buyer to layer with other down payment programs should they need more than the $30-ish thousand.
And it's statewide. I mean,
Yes, both are
makes sense, of
statewide.
course, but most DPA programs are not.
They are not.
So that's a good thing. Brooke, where can folks find more information about the Community Fund DPA?
Yeah, so this DPA has its own website. So it's firstgendpa.org. So first,
FIRST.
thank you, Gen.
GEN.
DPA.org.
DPA.org. It's funny, we're joking because we actually maintain that site and we know darn well what website it
Yeah.
is. So anyways, well, that's great. And that's where folks can find out more. And also the application process is via that website as
It is.
well.
Yep.
All right. So both of these programs launched earlier this year. I think Minnesota Housing, you guys launched about a month before us. Are we able to measure any impacts yet? Heidi, how's your program going?
We are really excited about what we've been seeing to this point. We launched beginning of May, and we've the dollars, so the 50 million. With that, we're hoping to serve about 1,500, roughly 1,500 households. It depends on loan sizes
Sure.
that people take. And then as of the close of business yesterday, so October 1st, we have 982 households that have committed
Wow.
funds in this program, and 82% of that number of households are households who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So really, just really exciting.
That's a big number, 900 and some, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Anything else?
We just I think we both talked about it, but the programs are available statewide, and
Mhm.
our first gen program to this point, and again, this was like as of last week, I believe, but we've served 53 counties across the state out of
Nice.
87.
That's great.
So we're at about 61% of Minnesota counties that are being served with
All right.
the first gen program. And the funds are first come, first serve.
Mhm.
And they're not, it's not a replenishing
endless.
source. It's
Right.
not endless, correct. So if you're thinking about it, get out there and start having some conversation, because
Yeah.
the money's not going to be there.
Good
forever.
advice, and the housing market typically in Minnesota slows down a bit in fall and winter, so that actually is an advantage for
Right.
people who are looking. So
Absolutely.
good stuff to know. Brooke, same question for the First Gen Community Fund. How's it going?
It's going really well. So we launched mid-June, and we have data through August. And so our numbers are a lot smaller, but just for a little bit different reason. As I mentioned, the way our program works is you actually get approved for the down payment assistance, and then you start shopping. So as of the end of August, we've had 87 new home buyers. We have a handful, I don't know, probably a little over 100, probably near 200 at this point, of home buyers who are actually have been approved and are out shopping.
Have their letter that
Yep,
says you've got
yep.
funds
And
reserved.
so are out shopping. And so we're going to see a little bit of a slower ramp up,
Mhm.
because people are going to come in, get the approval, and then they have 90 days. And if they need an additional 2 months, so up to 150 days to
Mhm.
actually find that home.
Mhm.
So we'll see those numbers climbing in terms of number of actual buyers. But we're really excited too, because when we're looking at the numbers of who we're reaching, in terms of Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, it is about 82% at that snapshot at the end of August. So based on what you guys are experiencing at about 900 and what we're experiencing early, we fully anticipate that this program is going to stay in that 75 to 85% of reaching the community we hoped it would.
We hoped it would.
So it's super exciting that this first generation, this first generation approach,
Yeah.
is having the impact it's having in reaching the communities that it's reaching.
So we talked a little bit about this before the show. That 80% number is really impressive compared to numbers for traditional DPA programs, which is more like 35 or 40%. Am I right about that?
Yeah. So, the way that down payment assistance has worked in our state for decades is you have to be a first time home buyer. And essentially, the kind of standard definition for first time home buyer is not owned a home in the last 3 years. And so for those types of programs, what we generally see is about 35, as you said, 35 to 40% of reaching Black, Indigenous, and communities of color. And so this is more than doubling. The strategy is
Right.
more than doubling. And I just think it cannot be understated. The potential impact that this could be as a solution towards helping to close that very, very deep homeownership gap. And conversely, I think the fact that we've been such a state that has been so focused on homeownership and supporting people and providing down payment assistance for first time home buyers, again, not owning a home in the last 3 years, is one of the reasons why we have some of the highest rates of homeownership in the country.
Yeah.
And I
Yes.
think investing in a program like this could fast forward in 5 or 10 years where we could be leading in having some of the highest rates for communities of color as well.
That's really great. And it's, you guys know this, it's all about making it possible for everyone to participate in the economy that we have, in
It is.
which owning a home is the number one way that people
Correct.
build wealth in this country.
Correct.
So
And Bill,
that's
I
great.
think it's important to just say that the other programs that have existed,
Uh-huh.
first-time buyer programs,
Yeah.
they still exist.
Mm-hmm.
This is an addition to, right?
Right. That's a good
This is
point.
not this
Right.
is not a replacement of. This is an addition to.
Mhm.
Because I think we have to be intentional about continuing to support the communities we have and working to figure out the way to reach those that we haven't.
Mhm.
And there is, the pie got bigger, not smaller.
Right. Right.
So I just think it's important to name that.
Very important.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's see. And this program had double the amount of the Min Housing program. So I imagine there's probably more left at this point.
Yeah.
How long do we see this maybe lasting?
Yeah, it's hard to know, as you said, an exact
Right.
number. We've only used about 10% of our funds so far. So we are anticipating, just based on the rate of interest and the number of applications we can actually process each month, that this program will be around probably through the end of next year.
Okay.
So I think anybody who fits this definition of first-time home buyer, meaning just to state it again, you've never owned a home, your
First
parents have never
generation.
owned a
Yeah.
home. I think it's worth, if homeownership is something that you've dreamed of or thought about. I think the first step is just starting with homebuyer
Yeah.
education.
Mhm.
And learning about what it means to be a home buyer, and learning about this program and even other programs that exist that could help you
Yeah.
get into home ownership. So, you haven't missed the window. I think this program will be around for the next year, and I think there's still time and opportunity. And with that said, don't wait too long.
Don't wait too long.
Don't wait too long.
Well, this has been a great discussion, and it makes me proud to live in Minnesota. So,
Absolutely.
I think that'll do it for this episode. I always talk about homeownership advising on the way out here. I want to make a point here that these homeownership advisors know all about these programs. They can
Yes.
help you navigate them. They can help you figure out which one works better for you based on your circumstances. If you're interested in exploring homeownership for your own household, you can take a home buying class and enlist the help of a homeownership advisor for free by going to our website, hocmn.org. Our advisors and educators are embedded in organizations across the state, and they'll work with you to help get you mortgage ready, educate you on the buying process from A to Z, and walk with you through every step of the process. I want to thank our guests today, Heidi, Brooke. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks,
Thank
Bill.
you.
Appreciate it. As always, I want to acknowledge our sponsors: Associated Bank, Bell Bank, Bremer Bank, Huntington Bank, Midwest One Bank, and Old National Bank. Our sincere thanks to each of these organizations for their support. Thanks, and see you next time.